Hello everybody, and welcome to this WBEF Week 2023 Fringe conversation on Industry 5.0. My name is Andrew Knight. I'm our Global Data and Tech Lead at RICS. I work within our thought leadership and data analytics part of the organisation, and my role is to look at the effect of data and technology right across the built and natural environment. So I'm really pleased here to have a couple of really great speakers to talk about this subject this afternoon, and I'll get them to introduce themselves. So Liz Varga, Professor Liz Varga, perhaps you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. So my name's Liz Varga. I'm a Professor of Complex Systems at University College London. I work in the Civil Environmental Geomatic Engineering Department, and I run the Infrastructure Systems Institute. My research is primarily on sustainable innovation and resilience of critical infrastructure. So that means transport, energy, water, waste and telecommunication systems and their networks. I'm also a commissioner with the National Preparedness Commission. I'm a fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences and a fellow of the Chartered Association of Building Engineers.
Thanks, Liz. And Tannis.
Thanks so much, Andrew. It's great to be here today. My name is Tannis Liviniuk. I'm the president of Trillium Advisory Group. My background is in the construction industry, having started in the field, worked in a multitude of roles throughout my career, really ending up in the technology space. And my focus for about the last 10 years has been on deploying technology within the construction industry, right through project life cycles, from early design all the way through to commissioning and completions, and then into asset operations. So my role as the president of Trillium is really leading a team of very talented individuals that work with clients, helping them deploy new technologies or optimize existing technologies.
Thanks, Tannis. Well, Liz, if I could start with you, the first question I wanted to pose, and it was interesting when I was asked to chair this session around Industry 5.0, was I was thinking, well, I'm sure a lot of our listeners and viewers probably maybe haven't got their heads around Industry 4.0 yet. So it'd be interesting to hear your concept of where we are in Industry 4.0, what 4.0 means, and then leading on from that, given the kind of numbers of interpretations of what 5.0 might mean, what your view of 5.0 is. So could you tell us what's 4.0, and then what do you think 5.0 is going to look like?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, you're right, of course, because Industry 4.0 is still sort of very much being talked about now in terms of what people are doing in terms of technology and automation. And intelligent systems, actually, I would say. So if we could probably wrap up and think, well, 4.0 is about intelligent networking, connecting machines, processes, cyber physical systems, of course, and how we can intelligently control these networked systems. So all the technologies of artificial intelligence, you know, with machine learning, reinforcement learning, all of these play a massive role in Industry 4.0. And of course, even though it's been around for some 10 years or more, actually, we're still working on these things to make them happen in practice. We did some work with the World Economic Forum on the, if you like, the lack of adoption of Industry 4.0 in infrastructure systems in particular, and how we can maybe improve the adoption of Industry 4.0. So we know that some industries are still on the back foot with respect to adopting these technologies. And of course, Industry 5.0, I suppose the difference here is that where Industry 4.0 was trying to do almost like mass production and try to get technology out there wholesale, Industry 5.0 is much more about the value add of industry. Of course, it's still an evolution of industry, being Industry 5.0 following on from 4.0, but it's much more about sustainability, about resilience, and about that human sort of centric value that is added by industry. So it is definitely building still on technologies, but it's much more seeing what value are we getting out of industry, which is about keeping the environment safe, about keeping people safe and prosperous, and also about keeping systems resilient. And of course, therefore, systems thinking becomes a big component of Industry 5.0, one of the enablers, no doubt, we'll touch on later.
Thanks, Liz. And from your perspective, Tannis, well, where do you see, it's interesting, I think, as Liz described, the fact that a lot of different sectors are at different points on their adoption of 4.0, 4.0? Where do you see different sectors, and what's your definition of 5.0? Because I must admit, I asked ChatGPT for its definition of it and got a very different one from the EU one. So I'm interested to hear what you think 5.0 means.
I mean, I think Dr. Varga captured it perfectly. I mean, those three pillars really are fundamental when we're talking about Industry 5.0. So it's really an expansion of focus. You still need Industry 4.0. You need that technology deployment. You need those cyber physical systems. But Industry 5.0 really takes that and expands upon it. With those three pillars being, human focused, human centric, resilience, and sustainability. I spend a lot of time out on construction sites and working with organizations that are adopting and deploying technology, and you still hear the concern from individuals around how technology is going to impact their work now and in the future. This concept that robots are going to take over people's jobs creates a lot of nervousness. There's a very human impact to the deployment of technology. Industry 5.0 really takes that heavy automation focus out of the equation and looks at how humans and technology can work together more collaboratively, and that's really what impacts the resilience of those cyber physical systems. When we look at the COVID-19 pandemic and the transition away from work sites or away from the work face to more of a virtual environment, a heavy reliance on technology alone doesn't create that resilience that's needed. When you look at supply chain impacts that have occurred recently and continue to occur, a heavy technology focused, if you're missing a part that can shut your production line down, without having that human ingenuity and that creativity that are central to that human technology interaction, you can create some vulnerabilities in the system that are very difficult to navigate. If you follow Elon Musk on Twitter, and I know lots of people interact with his tweets, especially recently, but one caught my eye not long ago, and it's he made the statement that humans are underrated, and I thought that was such a great testament to the importance of Industry 5.0. Pushing that automation is important, but looking at how humans interact within that system and create value within that system is just as important as deploying the technology.
So I mean, it's a really great point you made there, because I think so often people now are looking at that kind of combination of, if we think particularly of AI and ML, that combination of people and those technologies as being really a much better combination than each of them separately, that there is that kind of complementary piece. I mean, staying with you Tannis, what are your thoughts on what 5.0 would change and impact across the built and natural environment, given the sector that we're here to kind of discuss?
I think there's a few impacts if we keep with those three pillars that Dr. Varga outlined. If we look at it being, Industry 5.0 being human-centric, really empowerment of people. It's taking what our teams already do so fantastically, and that's problem solving and being creative and looking at ways to overcome complex challenges, leveraging technology to do that more effectively. I think that's a great opportunity for all industries to embrace, specifically, within construction. I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to do that within Industry 5.0. It's also going to result in job creation. I mean, taking these new systems and these new technologies, there's an opportunity to learn, to embrace that tech, and ultimately create new roles and new skills and new opportunities for individuals within those industries as a result of that. Resilience, there's more adaptive problem solving. The challenges that we faced over the last few years, especially with supply chain issues that continue to be a challenge. I mean, system resilience is key, and almost every organization will tell you that that's something that they're focused on and really concerned about. So Industry 5.0 really helps teams be more resilient through that human technology collaboration. And then sustainability. I read an article a while back that showed that 13% of construction materials in the UK go direct to site and then direct to landfill, and that's an astounding amount of waste that's produced within construction projects. Industry 5.0, with that sustainability focus, will help address. I mean, it's not going to completely fix the problem, that's for sure. There's other avenues that need to be evaluated there, but it will help address the problem with more of a sustainability focus and really centering the team around that industry challenge.
Thanks, Tannis. Well, what are your thoughts, Liz, on the impact across the built and natural environment?
Yeah. So just supporting these comments, I would like to say that the decision-making capability, I think, of humans in the loop is going to be enhanced through Industry 5.0, because we'll be able to more accurately monitor systems, reduce the lack of accuracy in some of our monitoring devices, reduce the confusion on the interpretation of data that's collected. Because of the sort of Industry 4.0 technologies coming into play, we're going to have better information. And actually, what's really key here is that the decision maker won't be making decisions just for monitoring a single asset or even a part of a network. They'll actually be thinking about decision making for the wider group of stakeholders that are involved here. So how does a decision, on a particular asset, how does that affect the users of that asset, the consumers of the services provided by that asset? So you'll actually have that broader perspective on decision making and consequences of decision making. I think that would be a really valuable contribution of Industry 5.0 to human centricity. And certainly, I think with resilience and sustainability, I mean, these are becoming the sort of bottom lines for all industry and for all for commerce, for all organisations. So I think in terms of sustainability, obviously we have the net zero agenda, mechanisms like circular economy, like the old industrial ecosystems that we used to sort of talk about before. These back into play, because the whole sort of urban metabolism concept, which has been around for decades, is still very, very important, so that we can manage sustainability, exchange of materials with the environment, and obviously not constructing where we can avoid constructing in sustainable ways when we do have construction. So reference back to Sustainable Development Goals, which obviously now everyone is very familiar with and part of sort of daily conversation. And then just to mention resilience, I mean, we're working on several projects on infrastructure resilience. We see people looking at sectoral resilience, at energy system resilience, for example, or transport resilience. But of course, the infrastructure itself is so interdependent that we need the resilience of the whole of infrastructure in order to make sure that critical services continue to be provided. So there's a lot in Industry 5.0 that will help us achieve resilience of infrastructure. And I think this is where systems thinking comes into play much more strongly than maybe it has in the past. And we see reports coming out from, for example, the civil service on creating capabilities to think about whole systems and the consequences of systems and the boundaries we create by just thinking within our own role or organisation limits. So I think there's a lot of value to come out of Industry 5.0 for these areas, and value is the key word for Industry 5.0.
Thanks, Liv. Tannis, Liz mentioned, I think, the word sort of stakeholder there in terms of the number of stakeholders involved. And I'm minded to ask you, Tannis, that if you think just of a single asset across its life cycle, let alone, a portfolio or a region or a city, there's so many stakeholders, so many kind of practice areas involved in that whole life cycle of an asset. How can you see 5.0 helping us with this sort of communication between stakeholders, practices, flows of data? Because clearly at the moment we have a very fragmented system, don't we, across the built environment? And I guess that's one of its weaknesses, that multiplicity of stakeholders, that multiplicity of data sets, et cetera, to manage an asset over its full life cycle.
Absolutely. It's a challenge that I think every organization has either faced and come up with a solution for, perfect or imperfect, or is struggling with right now and trying to wrangle their way through that industry challenge. Projects are infrastructure, industrial, commercial projects. They're large, they're complicated. There's a lot of stakeholders involved, and there's a lot of data produced. That data is often siloed, and the siloed nature of that data makes it very difficult to, first and foremost, achieve transparency into what's taking place, but secondly, make decisions based on that data. And then comes into play the trustworthiness of data sources as well. Sometimes you end up with multiple versions of the truth, and then people aren't really sure which version of that they should believe and ultimately action. That challenge has existed for a long time. I mean, we're not struggling in our industry right now with a shortage of data. There's a deluge of data. The challenge now is how do we use that data more effectively? And what we're sometimes seeing is overproduction of data, and that has its own set of implications. Not only the resource cost and time that goes into production of that data, that in some cases we term it dark data. It gets stored in a vault, logged in a SharePoint site, thrown into a data lake, and really never actioned. It's produced, and there's a monetary and time cost associated with that, and there's no value creation from that process. But also, if we go back to the sustainability point, there's a carbon footprint of producing and storing that data. I was reading an article a couple days ago, and it's something I wasn't aware of, but the cloud computing industry is actually outpacing the airline industry in terms of carbon emissions, and that's astounding. That's substantial. And when we look at duplication of data, just as a singular point, just producing files in duplicate or storing versions of files repeatedly, I mean, ultimately the storage of that data itself has a carbon footprint. So as an industry, not only do we need to figure out how to use data more effectively, create better transparency, create those common data environments so that stakeholders can access trusted information, governed information when they need it, and use that data to make decisions, but also be very strategic around the data that we are capturing. And if there's no value in capturing that data point, question it, challenge it, and ultimately remove it from the process. The whole focus of Industry 5.0 is working smarter together, and that collaboration is key. There's a lot of individuals that facilitate project delivery and ultimately asset operations, and the insight of those individuals will help us identify those data sources that are creating value through the value chain, and those that aren't, or just being produced because somebody decided they needed a spreadsheet, and so people are spending time not productively producing those data sets. So I think there's a lot of potential there. It's being actioned by some organizations now. Other organizations are really trying to grapple with where they are at present time and where they want to be, and then putting a plan together to address that. But Industry 5.0 is certainly going to facilitate that process.
I mean, Liz, on that point, do you think one of the biggest barriers around almost reaping the benefits of this will be perhaps some of the existing behavioural issues around stakeholders sharing and working and trusting each other in what is sometimes quite a competitive environment? If you think of the construction phase, you've got inbuilt tensions there which don't lend themselves to taking advantage of this more collaborative approach.
Yeah, there's certainly barriers for information sharing, and I mean rightly so in some respects, because obviously we need to protect the rights and the privacy of individuals, living individuals. So we have got plenty of rules in place, like the general data protection regulations, but also freedom of information. So we have to be able to give people information about them if we're asked for it. So we do have to be mindful of the information that we collect. And also, the data we collect about the information. So our metadata, some of the ontologies we have that describe the data we're holding. We tend to try to solve the problem, but we don't take as much care on the information management side as we might do. And I think that's an opportunity that will be aided by Industry 5.0, because it will be more about the need for information management in order to collaborate, in order to share the information you need when you need it. So I think there is a lot of opportunity here to improve what we do already. The other thing to mention here is that there are several tools that are being used and are useful for information sharing. I mean, the primary one, of course, in construction is building information modelling. So BIM has been around now for some time and is quite a mature system where we can see bills of quantities and information about all these subcomponents of assets. But it also provides the single version of the truth. Now, of course, I mean, there's also criticism of BIM, because what you find is people, constructors and consultancies will build according to the BIM, but actually the reality of what's built is not quite, it's not as per the spec. So therefore, your record in the BIM is therefore already out of date the minute it's constructed. So if operators were to have that information in the BIM, then they would have to update that according to the actual constructed building or network or whatever it might be. So there's opportunities here to build on tools that are creating transparency and information sharing. But again, there are improvements still to be made. You know, we're not perfect by any means. So we need to be improving constantly towards getting the value out of these tools that we use.
So Tannis, moving on to the reality of Industry 5.0, you know, how quickly is it approaching? Is it really happening yet? Is it still, dare I say, rhetoric? And indeed, is any adoption being slowed down by the kind of economic situation at the moment? What's your sense of where are we on the journey to 5.0, given we're not entirely sure what it looks like?
That's a fantastic question. I think the answer depends on who you ask. You know, it's interesting because in some areas of construction, paper still rules. You know, you walk through construction sites and there's pens and paper everywhere. And you know, in some cases, it's more for ad hoc tasks, but in some cases, process workflows are paper driven. And you know, we talk about Industry 4.0. For some organizations, they're not there yet, and that's just the reality of it. So for some organizations, I think, you know, Industry 5.0 is something they are aware of, embracing, and perhaps have already, you know, outside of the terminology, have already evolved their systems to the point where some Industry 5.0 concepts have already been captured. And I've had this conversation with a few individuals around Industry 4.0 and, you know, the difference between Industry 5.0, and their response is, well, that's just part of Industry 4.0. Like, we're already at the point where we're incorporating sustainability and resilience. So, you know, it's an interesting ultimately overlap, because the line between Industry 4.0 and Industry 5.0 for a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals isn't clear. There's not a stopping point for one and a starting point for another. You know, it's really just a natural evolution of technology deployment that organizations have come to recognize that over automation has its share of risks and creates system vulnerability. And that step back to incorporate the human element has just naturally occurred as a result of implementation and lessons learned. For other organizations, Industry 3.0 is still their focus, and you know, getting to 4.0 is you know, still part of their roadmap. So I think it depends on who you're talking to and you know, what processes you're looking at. I think Industry 5.0 is here in some elements. You know, it's certainly not slowing down as far as you know, industry focus. Conference attendance, you know, you listen to topics, they might not call it Industry 5.0, the terminology might not be there, but the core concepts, those three pillars that Dr. Varga mentioned earlier, are really core to discussion: sustainability, system resilience, that human technology interaction, cobots. You know, we're talking about you know, being a you know, female in the construction industry, you know, diversity and inclusion, you know, the technology that aids in, you know, I'm you know, 5'5" and you know, I you know, lifting 100 pounds would be totally out of the question for me on a regular activity. But you look at some of the technology that's out there with the exoskeletons and things like that. I mean, you can do some fantastic things even if you're not you know, a weightlifter or something like that. So I mean, the technology deployment is really creating a lot of opportunities and you know, really advancements in the industry that are exciting. But I think organizations are at very different ends of the continuum when it comes to embracing Industry 5.0 and ultimately getting to the point where they've deployed technology and processes that are supportive of that paradigm shift.
So Liz, what's your perception on these different speeds of adoption? It almost feels like a whole bunch of people moving at very different speeds, as Tannis says.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously that creates challenges when we want to work between organisations, with multiple sectors, multiple disciplines. You know, if the maturity of each particular organisation is at different levels, it creates that challenge of how do you work? Do you work at the sort of the lowest common denominator? And of course, you want to bring people on. So, you know, there are, you know, sort of maturity management of like industry technologies. There are approaches out there that will bring on, you know, people to to different levels of maturity. So to become familiar with the technologies that are out there, the approaches that are out there, to begin to adopt standards, to even begin to shape standards once they get very mature. So it's almost like you need to have a discussion on, between sectors, between organizations on, what are they actually, what is their maturity level? What are they achieving? How are they valuing it? And then you can start the conversation of how can we work together on this? What are the gaps that we still need to fill? What are the competencies and skills and training are still needed to bring people up to that sort of common level when actually we can start moving transformatively with Industry 5.0? Because ultimately we do need to get value out of our technologies. So the point that Tannis makes about we don't need to be doing so much more of the technology is like working out what technologies we need to get the value out of these systems. So we have got lots of data, we have got a lot of familiarity with technologies, but let's step back a moment and just think about what is the value add, and then how do we collaborate on getting that value added.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because when I looked at it, it struck me that in many ways Industry 5.0 wasn't a new set of technologies. It was really just the kind of mature adoption of a lot of what we already have and getting that people piece properly kind of aligned. So it didn't feel like a technological evolution, more of a kind of an adoption evolution. But moving on from that thought, it's always obviously a big issue for us in the built and natural environment that one of the key stakeholder groups are governments, both in terms of national, local governments. How do you think they're on that journey, Liz, in terms of awareness and them taking on board this kind of view of Industry 4 and Industry 5?
Yeah. So I think there is awareness in government, certainly in the UK. I mentioned earlier the systems thinking report that was produced earlier this year, which was about helping people working in government to understand systems thinking better. So if we agree that systems thinking is a fundamental capability that's needed for Industry 5.0, this ability to think in systems, to understand boundaries, to understand the coevolution between systems, to understand non-linearities created between systems, all these things are fundamentally important if we're trying to get value out of systems. And they're important for for that people centricity that we need for the value of for Industry 5.0. So how do we get that value back to people? How do we get them to have better quality jobs, better contributions to keeping industry sustained itself? So it's about this two-way flow of capabilities. But I think governments are on board with it. I think there's often a need for reform in regulation, and this is often liberalizing. So okay, get my word out. Liberalizing. So basically, freeing up some of the regulation and legislation that's out there already that's constraining changes in industry. Because the regulation and legislation will keep industry doing what it's doing very well if the environment is very stable. Now, what we know is that our future environment is not going to be as stable. I mean, most of us have heard of VUCA, this idea of volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous. I mean, we see this particularly with climate change, but we also see it just through the interdependencies between all the different sectors that have to work together to achieve the services that come out of industry. So we're going to see a lot more VUCA environments. Therefore, we need regulation and legislation to be much more flexible. So therefore, liberalising some of that legislation to enable that flexibility, agility, timeliness is going to be really important. And I think that we just need to press ahead a bit more quickly than perhaps we are doing now.
Thanks, Liz. And Tannis, what's your perception on government and their readiness and their view of 5.0?
Yeah, I think it's. I think my answer to that is very similar to my response to the previous question, in that it varies. It depends on which group within government you're talking about, and ultimately, readiness is it's a bit of a subjective term, and it implies a state of preparedness and, kind of that finish line where you're ready to now jump into Industry 5.0, embrace it and charge forward. And, with the fluid nature of technology and the shifting technology landscape, shifting capabilities of individuals within those organizations, I think readiness is a term that perhaps often shifts from time to time. I think readiness at one point, it's not always going to be a stable state. As technology evolves, perhaps that readiness either increases or decreases as a result of people coming into the organization, process and procedure development, lessons learned, technology deployment, and ultimately spending on some of those core requirements, technology as part of Industry 4.0, but ultimately into Industry 5.0, getting into individual empowerment, data literacy, technology literacy. It's one thing to heavily invest and deploy technology. It's another thing to empower individuals that are using that technology to use it well. And as Dr. Varga mentioned, gain value from that technology. And that requires not just education, but a level of empowerment, access to information, coaching. It's not just about putting people through a training course and saying, we've purchased robots, here's how the robot works, okay, go use the robot. It's really an ongoing process, right? And that technology will interact with other systems. There's an ongoing support level that I think is needed there. Are governments ready for it? Just getting back to your original question, I think to some degree, yes. But I like the points Dr. Varga made around, having that level of flexibility, a rigid approach to technology adoption and deployment, creates a lot of barriers to leveraging that technology well, especially as that technology landscape shifts and new technology comes into the marketplace. We were chatting earlier about Chat GPT, and I think most people who are watching this have probably gone on and checked it out and heard about the hype. Maybe you're using it on a day-to-day basis. Talking to, and Dr. Varga, you can probably appreciate this, but talking to individuals who are instructing or professors, they've really been taken aback by this because it was a kind of a sudden deployment. Now, all of a sudden, students are using it, and the question is, how do we incorporate this within education? What are the barriers? What are the limitations? Should we be allowing it? How do we use this new tech? Industry 5.0 is, organizations and individuals are going to struggle with the same challenges on an ongoing basis. All of a sudden, a new technology is going to enter the scene, and we're going to have to take a step back and figure out, how does this fit? How does it change the way we work? And ultimately, as government or organizations or individuals, how do we embrace it and move forward with it to create more value than we could create yesterday?
Thanks, Tannis. I mean, almost building on that, I mean, there are clear opportunities from 5.0, despite its slightly differing, definitions. But, for an organization, whether it's government or private sector, what practically do you think they need to do in terms of changes or investments? It might not be investment in technology if they're already up to kind of 4.0, but what do they need to do differently? What's their kind of starter for 10 to do things differently to start to actually to get the opportunities, get the benefits from 5.0?
That's a great question. First, I think taking a step back and really evaluating what those opportunities are as an organization is key to beginning the journey. I mean, there's so many stories and case studies about teams that just kind of jump in and cross their fingers and hope for the best, and the outcome sometimes is positive and sometimes is not so much. Those not so much stories tend to get highlighted at events, and people you can feel the pain that they're sharing when they're sharing those lessons learned. So starting out with ultimately an organizational evaluation, figure out where you are, where you want to or need to be, and really putting a plan together to get to that point is key to gaining the most value from that journey, and then incorporating feedback, right? The lessons learned are key. We're not going to get it perfect every time, and that's okay, right? That learning experience is part of the journey, and it's really core to Industry 5.0, that human-centric approach, leveraging the knowledge and the intuition and the creativity of your team, incorporating that within processes, ultimately creates more resilient infrastructure and more sustainable infrastructure as a result of that. In the construction industry in the US, the average age of a welder, somebody was telling me the other day, is 58. 58. We're going to have a severe shortage of welders soon. And I mean, technology can address part of that issue. Robotic welding machines are available, they're on the market, but if the perception of future welders is, well, I shouldn't go into welding because robots are going to be doing my job 10 years from now, you know, that's not going to fix a very substantial problem that we have with getting skilled trades into the industry. So we really need to shift that dialogue away from robots are taking over construction trade work. That's not the end game. The end game is to facilitate workflows, but still leverage that human talent to really address the complicated or challenging situations, you know, the routine work when we talk about automation, especially data automation, right? Moving information from point A to point B, that can be automated, right? That's a task that requires, you know, an individual to spend time on something when perhaps their time would be better spent solving a problem or analyzing that data. Automation, you know, technology is great for facilitating workflow, but we still need that human talent. And for Industry 5.0, organizations really need to focus on how to leverage that human talent in combination with technology to maximize the value achieved. If your focus is just on tech and just on automation, you're not going to create a resilient system. And organizations will tell you that they've run into supply chain issues where they had very automated process flows and they can't get a part for a piece of machinery that went down and the whole production line falls down. Well, that's not a good scenario. We still need that human talent, and organizations really need to focus on how to bring that talent into the organization, you know, create that data literacy, that technology literacy, empower those individuals to work with that technology and maximize the value creation.
Thanks. So Liz, what would your advice to any organization looking to start, you know, taking advantage of 5.0, what would your be advice on what they should do and perhaps what they shouldn't do?
Yeah, so I think 5.0, because it places this the focus on value, I think what organizations and whole sectors and all of the built environment really should be focusing on are outcomes. So for far too long, we've been looking at what our inputs are, what our outputs are. You know, so if we have more technology, or if we have a different sort of material, we know what the output will be. But actually, what we want to know is what the outcome will be. So what would it actually mean in terms of fewer disruptions? What will it mean in terms of performance, in terms of our maintenance schedules? How can we be more proactive about seeing what the condition of assets are so that we maintain in a more positive way, so that actually the assets don't fail when we need them to be resilient when we have these sort of more challenging environments. So it's about outcomes. So what can the outcomes be? And of course, ultimately, we're interested in impact, because that human level comes to the fact that, you know, people won't be harmed by the buildings and the built environment that we create, that there'll be less harm to them. There'll be fewer people killed on construction sites, fewer people having negative experiences through using infrastructure, you know, even through, you know, using metro lines and people falling into the, you know, the trains, you know, when they could be protected, but we've got such overcrowding in certain places. So the impacts will be about human impacts, but also the positive impacts. So avoiding harm, but having the positive impacts of people being able to flourish, because the built environment is enabling them to do what they need to be doing, to go beyond themselves, to have the services and rely on those services to be there and available when they need it, so that they can build their social systems, their enterprise systems on top of good foundations. So I think there's a lot of opportunity if we could focus on these outcomes and impacts, rather than, like I say, with Industry 4.0, we're much more on the inputs and outputs. I think this is an opportunity to be more transformational in terms of our thinking.
And there's, you know, we've touched on the whole concept of people being so key to 5.0. What do you see as the potential, and I think in a good way, the potential changes and evolution of skills and culture across the sector? Because, you know, in many ways, it's still a very conservative sector, a very old-fashioned sector in many ways. Where do you see, hopefully, 5.0 bringing that kind of evolution to the skills and addressing some of the issues that Tannis talked about in terms of retaining an attractiveness for that blend of trade skills, but still, you know, using automation in the right place?
Yes, of course, and of course, this is about bringing much more diversity into the built environment and construction industry. sort of set. We need much more. We need more international contributions. We need more gender contributions. You know, this will give us a much better opportunity to shape the skills, because they will allow us to identify where we've been far too monoculture in terms of thinking. Even in terms of just simple maintenance of systems, you know, I'm just a little bit taller, 5'6". I certainly would not want to lift 100 pounds. But they, you know, they are, you know, if you're going to bring women engineers into this, then you need them to be having the appropriate technologies and capabilities to be able to deal with the delivery of the materials and the technologies that have to be in place for the built environment. So I think there's something here about being able to transform based on extending the diversity of skills and culture in the industry.
And Tannis, do you think there's something quite fundamental about almost the attractiveness of roles within the sector, making sure that actually they are seen as attractive to a very wide demographic? And also, I think, as you said, using that example of welders, where that there is a sense that actually it is a kind of tech-enabled role, but it still has that kind of human craft, that human artisan almost type sort of value to it.
Absolutely. I mean, the ability to attract skilled craft professionals is foundational to our, as an industry, our ability to be successful and deliver on not only project delivery but infrastructure sustainability targets as well. We need diversity in the industry. We need skills. We need talent, and ultimately, we have to position our industry as one that's exciting and attractive to the next generation of professionals that are going through schooling and ultimately considering which industry they want to enter. You know, still having this you know, pen and paper approach to construction in some regions doesn't necessarily facilitate that attractiveness, right? And when you look at a generation that grew up with tablets in their hands, going out to a site, you know, as an engineer or a construction superintendent and using pen and paper is going to feel very strange. It's going to feel like taking a step back. And ultimately, from a career perspective, an individual who wants to use technology to create more value is probably going to shy away from an industry where the perception is pen and paper are still the norm. So, you know, diversity is key to our success as an industry. We need broader perspective. We need more representation across all groups that are not well represented in construction right now. I mean, if you close your eyes and think about a construction worker and picture a construction worker, a construction trades professional, or an engineer, a lot of people, their perception is going to be, you know, very similar. We have to change that. That standard construction trade professional or that standard industry engineer should look very different to a variety of people, right? That diversity needs to expand within our industry. Technology is a great way to accomplish that, but also with that human element, that human collaboration, being able to bring diverse perspectives in, have people have their ideas heard and really be able to contribute to the innovation within the industry using that technology is fundamental to our success. You know, we're organizations globally are facing a challenge in recruiting individuals to some of these roles. That challenge continues to expand. Technology is a way to address that challenge. You know, getting to industry 4.0, you know, ultimately adoption and embracing that, and then shifting that to industry 5.0 and including the human-centric approach. It's part of the journey. It's not going to completely resolve the challenges that the industry is facing with you know, diversity and inclusion, but it's certainly a good way to start the journey or to address it.
Thanks. A final question to both of you, and I guess at the risk of perhaps, dare I say, overselling the importance of 5.0, but do you think, perhaps starting with you, Liz, do you think we'll be able to actually achieve this you know, the net zero agenda, the whole kind of importance of resilience, particularly in infrastructure, without 5.0, or is 5.0 key to really achieving those huge shifts in the value, the quality, the impact, and the management of the built environment?
Yeah, so I mean, what Industry 5.0 does is it actually brings us to a closer realization of things like planetary limits. You know, so the whole sustainability agenda and sustainable development agenda, just as a reminder that we cannot keep building without considering alternative ways of doing so that don't impinge on our limited Earth resources. So basically, it will definitely help. I mean, because the value focus is there, and the value on sustainability is there, the value on resilience and the human centricity is there. So it will definitely help. And of course, net zero is a target it's essential for climate mitigation. So and most organisations, I think, are largely on board with net zero and finding ways to make that happen. But it's still not enough. I mean, this is why Industry 5.0 will help, because it will reinforce the importance of the net zero targets, but also just sustainable development as a concept, and trying to get more towards developments that are actually restorative for the environment. So, you know, let's not ask what the environment can do for us. Let's ask what our developments can do for the environment. You know, we need to keep the environment there and flourishing so that we can flourish. So Industry 5.0 will be a catalyst for helping us to do that.
Thanks, Liz. And Tannis, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Dr. Varga captured it exceptionally well. I mean, ultimately, if we look at, and I love the concept of outcomes, right? If we look at the outcome that we need, I mean, not achieving net zero that's not an option. So we have to get to that point. So when you look at the outcome that's required, taking a step back and looking at where an organization is now, you know, it's somewhat, there's going to be a little bit of subjectivity in that, and probably some differences of opinion, but you can reverse engineer a path to the outcome that is required. And, you know, ultimately it's going to take a lot of investment and input into determining what that path looks like. But just kind of trudging along and crossing our fingers and hoping we get there at some point is not going to be a viable approach to achieving those net zero targets. So we have to begin with that as the outcome that is required, and then work our way backwards to devise a plan that will help us achieve ultimately that outcome. And, you know, take the inputs within the organization. For every organization, it's going to look different depending on their operations and where they are right now. That journey is going to look different from each group. So it's not going to be as simple as, you know, getting on Google or ChatGPT and saying, what's my plan using Industry 5.0 to achieve net zero, or deploying Industry 5.0 in ways that will create value for the environment. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. If it was, we would all just be directing you to whatever website that is. But ultimately, we can get there. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take determination and dedication and really commitment to those goals. But as an industry and as organizations, it's absolutely achievable.
Thanks, Tannis. Thanks, Liz. Well, it's clear that 5.0 has the potential to be transformative in so many ways for the sector, and indeed, I think, as you said, Liz, for the realization of the finite resources we have and the way we should be, as you say, giving back to the environment rather than taking out, which I think is a really important way of putting it. But for today, thanks ever so much for your time, both of you, Tannis and Liz. Have a great rest of the day, and once again, thanks for a fascinating conversation.